Okay, welcome everyone to Mastering the Middle Game lecture. So today I want to talk about Najdorf structures, and I'm going to show a couple of my games. Are there any Najdorf players? No. Are there any E4 players who face the Najdorf, who play Open Sicilian? Yeah. Okay. So I played the Najdorf several times with black. Recently I had a very bad experience with it. I played in the last round of the US Women's Championship and I lost, and it cost me the title. So now I'm going to show how to beat the Najdorf. So A4, C5. So I really like playing the English attack against the Najdorf. I have a very good score with it. I like the positions a lot. Does anyone know what the English attack?
Bishop E3.
Yeah, bishop E3. You can also start with F3, and there's a reason why I played bishop E3 here. So usually I start with F3 because after bishop E3 there's an additional line you have to know with knight G4, which is not something very dangerous, but just more to know. The reason I played bishop F3, bishop E3, because I was trying to confuse my opponent with the move order. So this game is from 2010 Olympiad. This was from the last round. We're playing against Indian team, and winning would mean that we're gonna tie for third, and we did win, but unfortunately we ended up in 5th place, I think. But it was still a very important game, of course, and a very nice result for our team. So I played bishop E3, E5. So there are two moves, knight F3 and knight B3. Does anyone know the difference? What is the English attack setup? Let's say I played knight B3, so what's the setup?
F3 and G4.
Right. So F3, queen D2, G4, castle queenside, and attack. So of course if I want to play F3 I cannot put my knight there. So what's the idea behind knight F3?
Yeah.
Right, so bishop. So if the bishop comes to E6 we can harass this bishop. So what is weak in black's position? D5. Yeah, so D5 square is a very weak square, and this D6 pawn is what kind of pawn? Backwards pawn, right. So for that reason, this bishop is the bad bishop, and this is the strong bishop. So let's say if black does something like this, oops, then of course white is very happy because there's more control of this square. The bishop will come to C4. So black really needs to hang on to that bishop. So knight goes to B3, queen D2. So again, more common move is F3, but the reason I played with queen D2 because there is also a line with F4, and I was avoiding a line and trying to confuse my opponent. So she played knight BD7, castle, again keeping F4 in mind. Rook C8, F3, and H5. So what is significant about this H5 move? Yes. Right. So when I was talking about middle games last time, I was mentioning how to play the middle games well, you have to understand your openings. So you have to understand how each position affects the game. Each move affects the game. So how does H5 affect the position for black? Right, so what does that mean? Right, so if black castles, if black ever castles, that means the king is going to be in more danger. So a lot of times the king is going to stay in the center until it becomes a lot safer to castle. So what else is going on in this position? So what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, what are the ideas? Right, knight on B3. So we put our knight on B3 from early on to do this setup, but in the long term this knight is a terrible piece. Doesn't really have any prospects. So always in the game we have to keep in mind that our knight is bad and our bishop is bad. So this can be a very sharp position because we castled queenside, and this king is either going to stay in the center or castle. So there's the possibility of doing a pawn storm. But also in the long term we have to think about our pieces, and when we're doing exchanges or even attacking, we still need to make sure our pieces don't get stuck and we don't end up in a position where we do a lot of exchanges, our attack doesn't work out, and then we're left with this bishop or we're left with this knight that cannot do anything. So king b1, always a safe move. So against this h5 move, there are different setups. There's a specific setup that I really like. So bishop comes out. Of course, black has to play on the queen side. My king is there, so h3. So I think the point of h3 is clear. So what does black do? h4, yeah. So now the position has changed, and very important to keep up with the changes. So now the king is in the center, so where should white play? What? Rook where? You're mumbling. Right, so white has to play in the center, because with the way that black committed with this pawn to h4 and everything, it's very scary for black to castle, because I can just play g3 and open up the position, and I have a direct attack, and it's not clear if black's counterattack is going to be so fast. So now we're assuming the king stays in the center, so we have to switch our idea and play in the center. So f4, queen c7, rook fe1, bishop c4. Okay, so it looked like white developed all the pieces, rook's in the center, knight's out, bishop's out. So what next? And I think this happens a lot when like we put our pieces on what we think are the best squares, and then we get a good position, and then not sure what to do next. Right, so we want to see, so we have everything in the center, so we want to see if we can open up the center, because if the center opens up, we're perfectly set up for it, right? All the rooks are here. If I take out these 4 pawns, this king is going to be very unhappy. So first what we have to look at is we can just open the center wide open, and see if we can just go straight for the throat. So let's say take, knight d5. So this is a computer line, like I analyzed it with a computer, and computer hangs on somehow. But it looks very scary for black. So I think playing this position is actually very scary for black, because you have to defend very precisely. So the idea is to keep the center closed, and to not, so first of all, I understand the knight on e5 looks very strong, knight in the center, but several disadvantages. You're inviting the knight into the game, you're still stuck with your backwards pawn, and you're opening up the center a little more. So for example, if I play knight d5, when I sacrifice this pawn, now I have an open file on your king. But if you play d takes e5, you're opening up your bishop, you're still keeping the center closed, and you got rid of your bad pawn. And now if it's your turn, you can play bishop b4. So this is a very double-edged position. It's not like white is just going to win. No, if white is a little inaccurate, black can create very good counterplay. So takes, so knight d5, just trying to, we don't care about the pawn, we just want to open up the position. So there are 2 ways of playing, so takes. So I don't want to focus too much on this line, it's just a very forced line, and black somehow hangs on. So bishop g5, so just so many pins, but attacking this h4 pawn, just very tactical mess. I mean, again, like I don't want to dwell too much on this. This is something you calculate. So if you can calculate it out and you evaluate it correctly, then this position is still a playable position. So you can say, okay, I like this position, I can play it. But if your force variation doesn't work out, or you don't like it as much, then we start looking for other moves. But this move has to be calculated first, because all our pieces are in the center. So we want to see if we can do anything with them. Okay, so what else can we do? So, first question we want to ask, does black have any threats? Yeah, so this b4 move is a little bit annoying. Yeah, a3. So a3, so what does this mean for black? What can black do?
Create double pawns.
Double pawns, actually, you want to take on d3? So b3, I mentioned this before, so your light squares look pretty awful. I don't care about my double pawns. You cannot do anything about my double pawns. You cannot push these pawns anymore, because this hangs, and again, your light squares. So I have a very simple plan. I can just put the bishop back, play here, and then ask you where your pieces are going. So we definitely, if you're going to trade your bishop, you have to trade it with the bishop. You don't want to trade it with the knight and just give it up. So, but there's a, when the pawn goes to a3, what's a move that black really wants to play? So how else can we play before? Do these pieces on the c file make sense?
Play before anyway.
No, before I'll take it. Why'd you give up a pawn?
Rook g8.
Okay, why not start with rook b8? So rook b8. So now before can be annoying. So actually a5 is a threat now because this pawn is protected. So what should white do? So every move like changes something a little bit about the position. So now that the pawn is on a3, now before is the main idea for black. a5 before. So how do we stop a4? Knight where? Knight d5 I can just take and go a5. Oh, the queen is taking, sorry. Knight d5, possible. Well, so this is the problem. When I insert a move, it shows the move that was played. Actually, what I'm not sure about knight d5. If I take, you're gonna take with the pawn. Okay, so knight d5. No, knight d5 is a possibility. But again, we have to calculate what happens if I win a pawn. So we go to the same line as we had before, basically. Except you have a pawn on a3 and I have a rook on b8. Okay. So the same thing I was talking about before, we have our pieces on the perfect position. Black has the same problem. He has all the pieces out, but it's not doesn't have a very clear plan. So knight goes to a2. So bishop d8, with the idea being a5. So how do we stop a5? Knight b4. So there's no a5. So queen b7 was played. So now a5 looks even stronger. But something major has changed in the position.
Black gave up C file.
Okay, so black gave up the c file. Something else in the center. In all those lines that we're looking at, how is the bishop being on d8 different than being on e7? What is more open? The e file. So what does white need to do? Right, so now we have to look at ways to open up the center. Because now if the center opens up, the rook is aiming right at the king. There's no pin, there is no bishop on e7 to make it safer. So what's a move we really need to consider? Yes. Right, knight d5. So compared to the other position, f5, d5, knight d5, and all those lines we were looking at, there was a bishop on e7, the king was a little safer. But now, significant difference in the position. So first of all, we stopped a5 because the queen is open. And now we want to see how our opponent is going to react to this move. So first we have to have such a terrible memory of what happened in my case. So now we have to calculate lines, because when we play a move like knight d5, we can't just play it and hope it works out. So let's say what happens if knight takes. So we have to take. So what if queen takes? Right, so bishop c4. So of course, if queen c4 just looks horrible, like black's position is just falling apart. Everything's hanging. Knight's hanging. This pawn is hanging. This pawn is hanging. So if queen d2, so we have options. So we have bishop d2, knight d2, rook d2, bishop f7. Yeah.
If you take with a knight, his next move is going to be taking on c4, so you've got your entry.
And once d6 falls, e5 is going to fall. This pawn is not going to live for very long. So now just position is falling apart. So now we're in an endgame, but it doesn't matter because not every attack needs to end up with a checkmate. We can just win in the endgame. And this is what I was talking about when I said we have to take into account the long-term weaknesses and which pieces we want to exchange, which pieces we want to keep. Because this d6 pawn, which was not a target before, all of a sudden endgame is very weak, as well as his a6 pawn. So in the game, she took on d3, queen takes, and castle. So now a lot of things have changed. So what's going on in the position now?
No white squared bishops.
No white squared bishops. Something else significant has happened.
So you have to change where you're aiming.
Okay, so black has castled. That's true. Another major exchange has happened. Right. So the d6 is still a weakness, but we could shut off the file, so we're not aiming at it anymore. So this is a big deal in the position because we don't have this. I mean, we still have the target, but it's harder to attack. So what else? What is black trying to do? Right, so a5, a4, b4, so black actually has a very strong attack going. Is our attack as powerful as white's attack? That's the big question. No? Okay. There's an outpost on c6. If you could get a knight on c6, that'd be great. Well, knight a5 I would not suggest. But the thing is, the more things we're saying, like the more things we notice about the position, and then all of a sudden it clicks, and then you find a move. And that's what we need to do during the game. Looking at the position, and you're like, you kind of have pieces together, but the more things you say about the position to yourself, the more things you notice, and then you understand what's important about the position. Because this position is significantly different than what we were looking at 5 moves ago. There are more pieces, some things were relevant, other things weren't as relevant. So it's a new position. So what was the weak? Yeah, d6. So how can we attack d6? Right. So again, when you really look at the position deeply and you ask yourself these questions, then they become, you notice them. Because if you look at the position, d6, like it looks weak, but you say, okay, there's no way to attack it. But the more you think about the position deeply, the more easier we find solutions. So bishop d2 does 2 things. Stops a5. So if you let your opponent play a5, okay, let's say I make a random move. All of a sudden this looks so scary. a4, like a4 with a tempo, b4, this b file opens up, and now we have to worry about not getting checkmated. So bishop d2. So my opponent went queen a7, still trying to go a5. So we can actually stop a5 by just putting piece there, but we have a tempo move. So take on e5, knight takes, and now you lost the tempo. Bishop b4. Yeah, another thing I have to say about moving the bishop, we tie down this knight, because the knight cannot move, this pawn is hanging. So bishop b4 was a good move, which of course I didn't play. So here, so actually this is a forced line, and this has a lot to do, this is something I've been working on a lot, and of course this game was 6 years ago, so I still had a problem with it. If I would play a sharp line, I was very attached to trying to attack and trying to somehow create a checkmate. So now I'm doing the same thing that I'm telling you, is to summarize the position and look at a bigger picture and always keep up with the changes in the position. So here it's harder to attack because we exchange a lot of pieces, it's harder to open up files. Because when there was a knight on f6, we had this idea of g4, g5, like tempo moves, we're just pushing everything forward. And here it's not so easy to do that, and our opponent has this plan. But, so if we look, so this is a forced line, so we have to calculate down this line. So if we exchange everything, and we reach this position, and one of the important things of calculation is evaluation. So rook d8 is impossible. That's not rook d8. Because I can simply take, So bishop has to move. And here. So how to evaluate this position?
Well, the rook has to go in front of the pawn.
Right, but so rook d8, so let's evaluate. So we calculated this forced line. So we have to decide, do we want to play this line or not? So we need to evaluate the position to decide. So yeah. So this d7 pawn is a major strength for white because black has to dedicate a piece or even two pieces to stopping it. So okay, my pieces are tied down to defending it, but black doesn't really have any good counterplay. So I can simply improve my position. I can put my queen here, and
then you bring the knight back between
yeah.
the king and the knight.
And then I can bring my knight around. My knight goes to g5, and it's hard for black to find moves. Let's say you cannot play a move like this because now you're in trouble.
If you move your knight over b3, can black just play bishop d4?
Well, okay, I can play c3 first to be more accurate. No, you're right. Because bishop d4, I'm going to lose a pawn. So yeah, I can put a pawn on c3. So black doesn't really have any active counterplay, so that gives me time to do whatever I want. When your opponent has counterplay, your opponent has active ideas, then you have to respond to them. But when your opponent is just tied down, doesn't have any moves, then it gives you time to improve your position. So I'm not sure why I didn't go down this line. Again, like I said, I was like very attached to trying to checkmate my opponent. But of course, if we evaluate the position, we see that, that position is just very good for white. So I played bishop c3. So takes. Actually, I thought my bishop on c3 is very strong, and now that the pawn is gone, our knight is free. So at some point, our knight can finally join the game. So knight d4, 95. So knight c6. So here I thought after a long thing, she decided to play bishop f6 and sacrifice the exchange. Here during the game, I thought if simply take, my bishop is extremely strong and still aiming at the king. It's very hard to hang on to this pawn. If she plays something like this king is extremely lonely. I can pick up this pawn. And long term, I thought I just have a very, very strong attack. Well, hopes of a very strong attack. But I mean, white's position is still better. Of course, my bishop is better than this, and you have a weakness. I still can use the g file. But of course, bishop b4 was objectively still the best move. So bishop f6. So queen f2. 5. No, it's funny because I'm looking at this game and I'm thinking about what I was thinking about, and I realized I was still thinking about going after this king. So my opponent is just desperately trying to find counterplay. So this game went on for a while, and white eventually won. So it was an important game for our team. Okay, so the game went on for 20 more moves. I don't want to show that. So let's move on to. Okay, so again playing. So this is 2 years ago in Reykjavik Open. Playing the same line. H6. So h5. So this position can come from different move orders. Black can play h5 sooner or one move later. So not going to focus too much on the opening, just to reach the same position. So I really like this setup, so I always play it. I always play the same things. So a3. I actually got the same exact position. But during the game, so this was 2 years ago, the other game was 6 years ago, so I wasn't sure if it's the same position or not. Like, I have a very bad memory, I can't remember my games. So I was spending some time, and my opponent was too. And actually, I'm not sure why if he saw that game, why he would repeat it, because white just got a better position. So my opponent went castle, so I got the same position. So this time I didn't find the best move, which is, so instead of improving, I'm going in the opposite direction. So in my first game, I found the best move. So this time I played differently. So I decided that I need to checkmate my opponent. So I went g3. So, it's a very one-dimensional kind of thinking. The king is there, I need to go g3, I need to checkmate. So h takes, rook g1. Oh, no, sorry, f5, yeah. So the reason I played f5 is to make this bishop very bad. I had these big dreams of my knight landing on e4 and taking this pawn and just playing bishop h6 and very straightforward kind of thinking. So, I mean, white's next move is pretty obvious. Rook g1, take the pawn, and and then double and checkmate. So actually, I won a really nice attacking game, but then my coach was mad at me anyways because I played g3. What's white's most dangerous piece when you're trying to attack? The queen. So white has to do something about this queen. I'm not sure what b4 does. I'm going to go a4. So how can black try to exchange queens? Yeah. Right, queen c7, queen c4. So another idea behind queen c7 and queen c4 is that if I don't exchange queens, now you can simply put a bishop on h4 and the queen defends it, which can be quite annoying. So here, and now we end up in this endgame, which, playable endgame, so we can say. So you can have a preference if you like white or black. And of course, it's just playable for both sides. So my opponent went rook c8, bishop h4. So there's no queen e4 because rook c4. So same idea, but he's not threatening to exchange queens. So the bishop has moved, so which square is available? Right, so knight a5. So queen e4, because there's no more queen c4.
C6 would be a good square for the knight.
Oh, well, it's black to move, so black moved the bishop. Yeah, the bishop's under attack. So now the knight is hanging, the knight has to move. So actually this position is already very dangerous for black because my knight is great. Simple threat again, rook g3, rook g1, just going after the king. So nothing sophisticated in this game. So knight b8, trying to exchange pieces, takes. So how to take, with the queen or the rook?
Queen looks really bad on b8. Queen is not. I'll take
Rook, so you can play queen c.
Right. So again, you want to play this queen c4 move. So my opponent just reacted very poorly. So he took with the queen, and soon the game was over. So rook has to take. Actually, also for another reason. So if bishop g5, the king just runs away. And it turns out, if I try to do something, the king just stays on e7. And it's very hard to get through the king, and the c2 pawn is weak. Queen c4 ideas, b4 ideas, so I can't just do whatever I want, so I have to be a little cautious. So black has enough counterplay to defend here. So my opponent played very carelessly. Where am I? So he took with the queen, rook g3, rook c4. Where does the queen go?
Behind the rook on
Yep.
g2.
So here black's position is already falling apart. King h8. You mean rook g1?
Rook g1.
Right, rook g1. So now we're actually threatening to take, so rook g8. What?
Bishop H6.
So why bishop g5?
Now you're removing one of the guards on.
Right, because this bishop on f6 is the main defender. The bishop is gone because everything we're doing is on the dark squares. Once this bishop is gone, this position is just not gonna hold up. So bishop g5, queen here, f3 or e2. I played queen f3, yeah. So I'm trying to do now checkmating on h file. So g6, desperate attempt. I think next move resigned.
You got the pawn,
Pawn
now
moves.
take the pawn.
Takes the pawn.
And you threatening to check with the bishop and steal the queen.
Threatening a lot of things, yeah. So takes.
I'm just saying you threatening.
Okay, so let's calculate it out a win. So I'll tell you one. Yeah, 2 moves my
I think
opponent.
you go ahead and take the bishop.
And if the queen takes?
Now the bishop takes check.
So bishop takes, bishop to queen takes. I think I found, yeah, so that's what I play. Queen h5 here and changing directions. Because if I take on f6, queen takes and defense. So this side, take on g6, everything falls apart. Actually, I think I have another win here. So take, queen takes. I think I can just take. Because if you take my queen, I have mate. Yeah, but in this position, I mean, there's just so many ways. You just have to pick one and make sure it works. Actually, it happens a lot when you have a winning position. You think everything wins, and then you pick the worst one. Okay, so next one, because we have time. This one was played 2013. So before the one that I just showed, so a4, c5. So f3, as I mentioned, to stop the knight g4 move. So f4, so again, I'm playing my same king b1. So we ended up on the same position, and then my opponent castles. So now this castle is much different than the castle in the other position. So what's going on here? So g4 is one idea. But let's compare this position to the other one. So how is this position castled compared to the other one that's castled? Yeah, so black's counterplay is not coming as fast. What else? So if white just starts pushing like f5, g4, g5, is it more dangerous or less dangerous compared to the other position?
Less dangerous. More pieces.
So you think white's attack, just like shoving my pawns, is less dangerous in this position than in the other one. So I can open the other position. So this position, compared to this, compared to this position. So in which position is this pawn move, like g4, g5, scarier?
This one.
But you just told me the other one.
I take the one.
Ah. Why?
Because you can gain more tempting by pushing your pawns forward because there are more pieces in the way to attack.
Ah, so before you said it's harder to attack because there are more pieces, but now you're telling me it's easier because there are more pieces. Right, because if I go f5, if I can just go f5, g4, g5, f6, everything is with a tempo and black has to react to it. And in this,
Just no.
okay. In the other position, this one? No, this one. In this position, if I go g4, g5, f5, so it's 3 moves and none of them are tempo moves. So that gives my opponent time to go like a5, a4, and everything my opponent's doing with a tempo. Which is why I got yelled at for playing g4. Okay. All right, so what's the best way, or how do you want to start this attack? So g4. So do we want to play g4 first, or do we want to throw in f5? I mean, okay, we can go after the h4 pawn, but like even if you go and you take the h4 pawn, then I'm not sure.
I would like to play rook to g1 first.
What did you say before that the knight on e3 is bad, so force your opponent to take that?
So after f5 is not going to take, bishop is going to go to c4. I mean, if my opponent took on, I would be so happy if I about that. But like, do we want to go g4, g5, or do we want to play f5 first? Does black want to do anything? So we have to consider these things.
Well, I would play f5 just so black doesn't take that time to get the e5. Seems like if I'm on the attack on the wing, I'd rather send it to gold.
Right, so I played f5 too for a similar reasoning, because if I go g4, can't even do that. So if I go g4 first of all, we have to calculate before, but that aside, something like this, all of a sudden, if you go here, then where exactly is your attack? So of course, the knight can go to d4, then b4. Still a complicated position, still I would prefer white, but it makes our attack a little bit tougher. So of course, every move we have to calculate what's going to happen after b4. But f5, so I played this move, and I really like this move because g4, and now we have a threat. We just want to push g5, f6, and just push everything back. So my opponent took, so rook g1, b4.
To the king for every piece.
Yeah, here I thought that time is very important, so I don't care so much about pawns. I just don't want black to get counterplay, because once I take on g3, it's very hard for black to find defense. Because this g7 pawn is a major weakness, and my pieces are just getting in so fast. So by the time he takes his time to take all these pawns, I have a very strong attack. So knight d5. So actually, I was very surprised because I spent so much time calculating here. Because this is a big decision to play knight d5, and then my opponent played so fast. I mean, I was really surprised. How can you play so fast in such a dangerous position? So he took. So he can take like this too. And here, I believe I was thinking about this bishop h6 move. And then doing this, and just making sure the king doesn't escape, because I really need my dark square bishop to attack, so I didn't want to just give it up. But I also think rook g3 is very dangerous. And then double the rooks, and queen h6 is a threat. And the king, if let's say, like you can never go king h7, I always have f6, and queen h6 is a strong move, so very hard to find accurate defense for black. So my opponent actually took here and here, so how to capture back. So everyone wants to take with the pawn? Right, so again, a lot of things changed in the position. So why is taking with a pawn good besides the fact that we're stopping queen c4? So if you ever play d4, I'm going to play e4, and then this bishop is just going to be bad. So first we get the c file. Second, when we take on g3, and also our queen is on this diagonal in case I want to trade bishops, and my queen can jump to h6. And also, in some cases, my knight can jump here, and I get the c file if my attack doesn't work out, so I have disadvantages, and also this b4 pawn is hanging. So my opponent played bishop h4. So take the pawn. So he made another bad move. But this makes sense, of course. I mean, it's a bad move because I have a refutation. But the way he's playing makes sense, because if he loses this g3 pawn, then this attack is very strong. But if he can hang on to this pawn, he's shutting down the whole g file. And if we somehow end up in an endgame, all of a sudden this g3 pawn is going to become very dangerous. So what to do? Knight a5, I'll go queen f6. Again, a lot of options for white, but queen g4 is white is already almost like white is winning, because queen g4 just paralyzes black. Queen cannot move, bishop cannot move, knight really doesn't have any squares. Cannot go to f6, cannot go to b6, I'm gonna take you. So black is just running out of options. So what is white's very simple idea? Bishop a6, I'll go queen f6, which also looks winning. Well, black most likely is going to put a queen on f6. So, okay. Actually, he did put a queen on f6. But imagine I'm just passing the move to white. What would you like to do? f6, queen f6. Queen e7.
That's a little I don't know why I said that.
Away with taking the g3.
No, because, hold on. She was asking a question. So if you take on g3, I'm going to take everything again. Put a pawn on f6, rook f7, and just like defend my position. So our opponent is completely paralyzed. That means we have time to improve something. What was our worst piece? So where does our knight really want to be? Right, so white wants simply to transfer the knight here, and then I can either take on g3, maybe I can push f6. If I put my knight on e4, I can even play bishop h6, you cannot put a piece on f6. So black is just completely tied down. So black doesn't have any active moves, black doesn't have counterplay, which gives us the option to play very active. So my opponent made a very bad move. So what should white do? 92. So now you're inviting 94 with a tempo. So queen f6. But I mean, in this position, it's so hard to suggest a move. So it's like when your opponent is in a bad position, it's so easy to fall apart. Well, first, if you're in a bad position, it's easy for you to fall apart too, of course. So 92. So knight f3 is simply just trapped. And okay, the game continued for a few moves, but actually, I think he resigned here. Yeah. So different positions. So if we compare like the castle in this position, castle in the other position, how position changes, keeping up with the changes of the position. So it's very important to constantly you're summarizing the position, asking yourself what's changed, how is this significant, and you're not really stuck on one idea. Like that game that I showed you, and I admit it, like it still happens to me. Like when I see an idea and I really like it, it's very hard to let go, but it's very important. You make yourself to look for this kind of, you ask yourself these questions, what changed in the position, you're not just playing the same idea you had 10 moves ago that's no longer relevant. All right, so this is it for today. So thank you for coming to watch.